At 61, Teresa Vale sat in the back row of the Sandoval County auction room, with $12 inside her glove. The ceiling fan clicked over men who already owned too much. Town clerks whispered over paper programs. Councilmen leaned back in their chairs. Near the front, Grant Hollis, owner of Silver Mesa Springs Resort, rested one polished boot across his knee and smiled as if nothing in that room could ever surprise him. Then the auctioneer cleared his throat. Desert Star Bathhouse. Abandoned mineral bath facility. North edge of town. Tax delinquent. Structural damage. No active water service. Nobody raised a hand. Everyone knew the place. A dead adobe building on the desert road. A dry pool lined with cracked blue tiles, broken mirrors, rusted pipes, dressing rooms full of dust, and sulfur stains that looked like old scars. Then Teresa lifted her bidder card. $12, she said. For 1 second, the room went still. Then, laughter rolled over her like heat off the desert road. Grant Hollis turned to the councilman beside him and said loudly, "Let her have it. She just bought a grave." That night, Teresa slept on the floor of the bathhouse changing room, her coat under her head, sand sliding through the broken windows. And sometime after midnight, beneath the empty pool everyone swore had been dry for 40 years, she heard water dripping. But what nobody knew was that the dead bathhouse had been hiding something the whole town had spent years trying to keep buried. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If stories about forgotten people and forgotten places mean something to you, hit the like button and subscribe, because Teresa Vale's story begins with a woman everyone had already counted out. Teresa had learned early that some doors closed before poor people were old enough to ask who had locked them. She was 8 the first time her mother hurried her past the old Desert Star bathhouse. Back then, half the sign still hung from 2 rusted chains, swinging in the New Mexico wind. The words Desert Star Mineral Baths were faded, but Teresa thought they sounded beautiful, like a promise made to someone else. Her grandmother, Marisol, used to say the spring water had once belonged to working people. Women came there after washing linens all week. Ranch hands soaked their bent backs. Mothers brought children with coughs, but by Teresa's childhood, the gate was chained shut. When she stopped to look through the fence, her mother gripped her wrist and pulled her along. "Why can't we go in?" Teresa asked. Her mother stared at the dry pool beyond the bars, at the pale mineral crust shining along the cracked tiles. Then she said, "Some doors close before a child is old enough to know who shut them." A week later, Teresa found a small blue tile outside the bathhouse fence, chipped at one corner and smooth on one side. She slipped it into her pocket and kept it in a tin box under her bed. Some girls kept ribbons. Teresa kept a broken piece of a place nobody wanted to explain. As she grew older, she became good at noticing what other people stepped over. Marisol taught her that honest work did not make a person small. Cleaning was not shame. Shame belonged to people who used another person's lowered head as permission to lie. When people lie, Marisol told her, the floor usually knows first. At Silver Mesa Springs Resort, Teresa was not the fastest cleaner, but she was the most exact. She knew which hallway sweated when underground pipes ran hot. She knew which steam room door stuck before guests complained. She could tell from a white ring on tile whether water had dried that morning or 3 days earlier. In her uniform pocket, she carried a small brown notebook. She wrote everything down: room numbers, dates, broken locks, leaking pipes, lost earrings, guest complaints, maintenance requests that never appeared on official forms. Her notes had saved younger housekeepers from blame more than once. The others teased her. Miss Teresa and her little book. Teresa only smiled and kept writing. She also carried an old scraper with a wooden handle. It lifted mineral crust without damaging tile. Her hands were lined, dry, and strong, and they knew how to find the edge of something hidden. For 18 years, Teresa entered Silver Mesa Springs before sunrise through the service door. She cleaned rooms that cost more per night than she paid for a month of rent behind the old laundry on Juniper Street. She watched guests soak in private mineral tubs. She watched Grant Hollis shake hands with councilmen beside the pools and speak about heritage, healing, and the generosity of the land. No one ever asked Teresa what she knew about the land. Then, in late August, the resort opened a new VIP spa wing. Teresa was assigned to the night corridor. That was when she first saw the mud. It was not ordinary desert mud. It was darker, almost gray, with a faint sulfur smell and a mineral shine that reminded her of the old crust around the dead bathhouse pool. She found it near a locked service door behind the spa. The next night, it appeared again. Teresa wrote it down. 2 nights later, while folding towels in the laundry room, she saw Grant Hollis pass by with 2 town councilmen. Grant unlocked the same service door with a brass key, and all 3 men disappeared behind the spa. By morning, a diamond bracelet was missing from a VIP suite. The manager called the cleaning staff into the laundry room. Lockers were opened. Bags were searched. Teresa stood still while the younger women watched the floor. When the manager reached into Teresa's coat pocket, a velvet jewelry pouch fell out. Inside was the bracelet. Teresa looked at the pouch, then at Grant Hollis, standing in the doorway. "That is not mine," she said, but no one moved toward her. No one asked why a woman who wrote down lost earrings and leaking pipes would hide a diamond bracelet in the first pocket anyone would search. Grant said nothing. He only looked at Teresa the way a man looks at a stain he has already decided to remove. And the thing that broke Teresa Vale's life open did not arrive like a storm. It arrived in a velvet jewelry pouch, placed in a coat pocket she had not touched all morning. The manager did not call the sheriff. That was the first thing Teresa noticed. If they truly believed she had stolen a diamond bracelet from a guest in the VIP wing, they would have called the law before the velvet pouch stopped swinging from his hand. They would have checked the cameras. They would have asked who had entered the laundry room, who had touched the coat rack, who had been near her locker. Instead, the manager only looked toward Grant Hollis. Grant gave a small nod. "Clean out your locker," the manager said. Teresa stood among warm stacks of white towels while steam hissed from the pressing machine. The younger housekeepers kept their eyes down, not because they believed she was guilty, but because every woman in that room understood how fast a job could disappear. "I did not take that bracelet," Teresa said. Her voice was steady, but truth sounded small in a room already owned by someone else. Grant stepped closer, his cologne cutting through bleach and hot cotton. "Teresa," he said softly, "this can stay quiet if you leave without making trouble." Making trouble. That was what people called it when a poor woman asked for facts. Teresa reached for the small brown notebook in her uniform pocket. The manager's eyes sharpened. "Leave resort property here. This is mine. Your uniform is not. The notebook is." Grant stared at her for a moment. Then he smiled, thin and cold. "Let her keep her little book," he said. "She'll need something to remember this by." Teresa removed her name badge, placed it on the folding table, and walked out through the service door she had used for 18 years. No one followed. Outside, morning light touched the mesa. Guests in white robes crossed the courtyard toward private mineral pools. Somewhere behind the spa wall, hidden pumps hummed steadily, pushing warm water through pipes no guest ever saw. Teresa stood in the staff parking lot with a cardboard box in her arms. Inside were her lunch tin, her old scraper, a pair of worn shoes, and the photograph of Marisol she had kept taped inside her locker. 18 years fit into one box. By noon, half the town had heard. By evening, the story had changed shape. At the grocery store, the cashier placed Teresa's change on the counter instead of in her palm. 2 men by the canned goods stopped talking when she passed. A boy near the door watched her coat pockets. No one shouted thief. That almost made it worse. They only moved their eyes away, and in a small town, that was enough to turn a woman into a warning. Teresa bought rice, beans, and coffee with the last cash in her purse. She carried the bag back to her rented room behind the old laundry on Juniper Street, where one narrow window faced a brick wall and the sink coughed before giving water. She had lived there 12 years. She kept it clean enough to make poverty look orderly. 1 cot, 1 table, 2 chairs, though only one was used, a shelf of folded towels, Marisol's photograph above the lamp. An envelope lay on the floor inside the door. Notice to vacate. Mr. Pruitt, her landlord, had written only 3 sentences. He was sorry. He could not risk trouble. She had 7 days. Teresa read it once. Then again, The room seemed smaller after that. She sat at the table, still wearing the resort shoes that had carried her through hallways where guests walked barefoot to warm water. Her right knee throbbed. Her hands smelled faintly of soap, metal, and dust. For a long while, she did not cry. She opened her notebook instead. The last pages held the things no one at the resort had wanted her to notice. Spa corridor, west wing. Service door locked at 9:10 p.m. Gray mineral mud near threshold. Same mud again, 11:40 p.m. Brass key in G. H. Right hand. Councilman Pike, present. Councilwoman Darden, present. Camera over laundry, door angled away. Bracelet reported missing next morning. Teresa touched the words with one finger. Her handwriting was plain. Her spelling was not perfect, but the facts were there. Then, she pulled the tin box from beneath her bed. Inside were small things the world would not price correctly. Marisol's silver thimble, 2 buttons from her mother's black dress, a church medal rubbed smooth, and the broken blue tile Teresa had found outside the Desert Star Bathhouse fence when she was 8. She held the tile in her palm. It was cool, even in the warm room. For the first time in years, she wondered why her mother had feared that old bathhouse. Why Marisol had spoken of the spring water as if it were both blessing and wound. Why Grant Hollis, owner of the county's finest mineral resort, had looked almost relieved when Teresa became too disgraced to ask questions. A knock came. Mr. Pruitt stood in the hall with his hat in both hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "People are talking. People always talk. They say there might be charges. There won't be." He looked at the floor. That was answer enough. After he left, Teresa folded the notice and slipped it into her notebook behind the page about the gray mud. She did not know where she would go. She only knew she had 7 days, $12 hidden inside her glove, and a broken blue tile from a place everyone said was dead. For the first time since the velvet pouch fell from her coat, Teresa wondered whether dead places sometimes remembered what living people tried to forget. On the second day after she lost her job, Teresa went to the sheriff's office. She wore her cleanest blouse and carried the brown notebook under one arm. The office smelled of old coffee and floor polish. Deputy Mills looked up, saw her, then looked down again. "I need to report that I was framed," Teresa said. Sheriff Larkin came from the back with a mug in his hand. He had known her since she was a girl, but now he looked at her like trouble had walked in wearing sensible shoes. "Silver Mesa Springs hasn't filed charges," he said. "That does not mean no crime happened. It means there is nothing for us to pursue. There are cameras, there are records. Someone put that bracelet in my coat. Do you have proof?" Teresa opened her notebook. Gray mineral mud, near a locked service door. Grant Hollis, with 2 council members after hours. A camera angled away from the laundry room. The bracelet found the next morning. The sheriff barely looked at the page. "That sounds like resort business," he said. "It sounds like a setup. It sounds like something you should let cool down." Teresa closed the notebook. She had heard that language before. Let it cool down meant be quiet. Be quiet meant disappear. By the end of the week, every door in town closed softly. The Desert Rose Inn said they were fully staffed. The Highway Motel said they could not risk trouble with Silver Mesa guests. The laundromat owner said he respected her work, but he had families to think about. Even Mrs. Vela, who had once asked Teresa to clean after her husband's funeral, spoke through a latched screen door. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Vela whispered. "My niece works at the resort." Teresa nodded. She understood fear. She had lived around it long enough to know its shape. On the 5th day, she went to Evan's house. Evan was her sister's son, the closest thing she had to family left. He lived near the resort golf course in a pale stucco house with 2 young mesquite trees in the yard. His wife, Lauren, answered first. The smile left her face before Teresa spoke. Evan came from the kitchen. "Aunt Teresa, I only need a place for a few nights." Lauren looked toward the hallway, where the children were watching television. Evan lowered his voice. "It's complicated." "No," Teresa said. "It isn't." He swallowed. "Some of my maintenance contracts come through Silver Mesa. Grant Hollis knows people. If this gets uglier, it is already ugly. I mean for my family." Teresa looked past him into the house. On one wall hung a framed photograph from his wedding. She had ironed the tablecloths for that reception and washed dishes until midnight. "I won't bring trouble to your door," she said. Relief crossed his face before shame did. That was the part she remembered. She slept that night in her rented room behind the old laundry on Juniper Street, with 2 packed bags beside the cot. The notice to vacate lay on the table. Her notebook rested on top of it. In the morning, she went to the courthouse to ask whether the eviction could be delayed. The clerk slid a form toward her. "You can file a response," the clerk said. "How much is the fee?" The clerk named a number Teresa did not have. Teresa stepped back from the counter. That was when she saw the notice pinned to the bulletin board. County tax auction. Most listings were scrubland, storage lots, and damaged buildings. Her eyes moved down the page until they stopped on one line. Desert Star Bathhouse, North Basin Road, minimum bid, $12. For a moment, the courthouse hallway went quiet around her. She saw the chained gate from childhood, the dry blue pool, her mother's hand tightening around her wrist. Marisol saying the spring water had once helped people who worked too hard and owned too little. The clerk noticed her staring. "Nobody wants that one," she said. "It's been on the list before." Teresa did not answer. Inside her left glove, stitched into a small seam, were the last $12 she had saved. She had kept them for food, bus fare, or one clean night somewhere safe. Instead, she took the auction notice from the board. That afternoon, she sat in the back of the auction room, holding a bidder card with both hands. Parcel after parcel sold for more than she could imagine. Then the auctioneer read the name. Desert Star Bathhouse. Structural damage. No active water service. Broken fencing. Unknown plumbing. Possible contamination. Minimum bid, $12. Silence. Teresa raised her card. 12 from the back, the auctioneer said. A chuckle rose from the front. Then another. Soon, the whole room was laughing. Grant Hollis leaned toward Councilman Avery Pike and spoke loudly enough for Teresa to hear. "Let her have it. She just bought a grave." The auctioneer tapped his papers. Sold. The word landed harder than Teresa expected. Not because she believed she had won something valuable. Not yet. But because for the first time in 7 days, a paper carried her name without accusing her of anything. Outside, Desert Wind lifted the edge of the auction receipt in her hand. She had no job, no room after tomorrow, and no family willing to open a door. But for $12, she owned the dead bathhouse at the edge of town. Teresa folded the receipt and placed it inside her notebook, behind the eviction notice and the page about the gray mud. Then she started walking toward North Basin Road. Teresa had walked North Basin Road before, but never with everything she owned pulling at her shoulders. The town ended quietly. First came the gas station, then the tire shop, then the last row of small houses with chain-link fences and sun-faded chairs on the porches. After that, the road narrowed, and the desert opened on both sides, wide and bright, and empty enough to make a person feel like a mistake. She carried 2 canvas bags. One held clothes, coffee, rice, beans, and Marisol's photograph wrapped in a towel. The other held her notebook, the blue tile, her scraper, a dented pot, matches, and a blanket thin enough to fold under one arm. The auction receipt stayed in her blouse pocket. Every few minutes, Teresa touched it through the fabric, not because she trusted it completely. She had learned that paper could be twisted by people with better shoes and louder voices. But for now, the receipt said her name. It said Desert Star Bathhouse. It said sold. That was more than any door in town had given her. The afternoon sun pressed hard against the road. Dust rose around her shoes. Creosote bushes gave off a sharp, bitter smell. Farther out, yucca stalks stood like old candles burned down by wind. A raven circled once above a telephone pole, then flew toward the hills. A truck passed her without slowing. Then another. The third truck slowed just enough for a man to lean out the window. "You going to that old bathhouse?" Teresa kept walking. "That place is dead, lady." The truck rolled on, leaving exhaust and laughter behind it. Teresa did not answer. She had spent enough of her life giving words to people who only wanted to hear themselves. The farther she walked, the more the resort disappeared behind her. Silver Mesa Springs sat on the south rise, shining with glass, pale stone, blue pools, and trimmed desert gardens. Even from a distance, she could see the roofs glinting. The place looked clean enough to have no history. North Basin Road curved away from it toward poorer land. Here the desert was not arranged for guests. It had broken bottles in the ditch, rusted fence wire, dry washes, and old beer cans flashing under scrub. The wind carried sand low across the road. It slipped under Teresa's collar and stuck to the sweat at her neck. Her knee began to ache before she reached the old mile marker. She stopped beside a leaning fence post and lowered the bags. Her hands trembled from the weight. She drank the last of the water from a reused soda bottle and looked back once. The town seemed smaller from there. For a moment, fear rose so sharply she almost turned around. She could go back to the courthouse steps. She could ask the clerk about a shelter in Albuquerque. She could spend her $12 receipt as a story and admit that everyone in the auction room had been right. Then she looked at the road ahead. There was nowhere behind her that wanted her, so she lifted the bags again. By late afternoon, the Desert Star sign appeared above the scrub. At first, it was only a crooked shape against the sun. Then the letters came clear, one by one, faded blue on weathered metal. Desert Star Mineral Baths. The word star hung lower than the others, one chain broken, its point tapping the post whenever the wind moved. The building stood beyond a rusted iron fence. It was smaller than Teresa remembered, and sadder than memory allowed. Adobe walls had cracked from roofline to foundation. The front doors leaned inward. One window was boarded, another broken open. Weeds grew through the walkway. A dry fountain sat near the entrance, full of sand and bird feathers. Beyond the building, the old outdoor pool lay in a shallow courtyard. Teresa walked to the fence and stared. The pool was empty, just as it had been when she was a child. Blue tiles lined the basin in broken rows. Some had fallen away. Some were buried under pale mineral crust. The drain at the deep end was plugged with sand. A tumbleweed rested in the middle, like something that had tried to cross and given up. She stood there a long time. This was what she had bought. Not a home. Not really. Not yet. A locked ruin under a hard sky. The county key shook in her hand as she fitted it into the gate. At first, the lock would not turn. She pressed harder. Rust scraped. The shackle gave with a dry snap. The gate opened inward, crying on its hinges. Teresa stepped through. No one welcomed her. No porch light waited. No voice called from inside. Only wind moved through the cracked courtyard and pushed sand in thin lines across the tile. She crossed the walkway and reached the main door. Someone had painted "Keep Out" on the wood years ago, but the letters had faded until they looked tired of warning people. Inside, the air was hotter than outside and smelled of dust, old minerals, and sun-baked wood. Teresa stood in the lobby with her bags at her feet. A long counter sagged along one wall. Behind it, cubbyholes for keys sat empty. A cracked mirror reflected only part of her face. On the floor, scattered tiles glimmered blue beneath a layer of dirt. She took out Marisol's photograph and set it on the counter. "Well," Teresa whispered, "we made it." Her voice sounded small in the empty room, but it did not disappear. It came back to her from the cracked walls, softened by dust. As if the old place had heard worse things and survived them. Teresa picked up her bags and moved toward the changing rooms. Outside, the desert wind pressed against the broken windows. Behind her, the gate swung once and settled. For the first time since Grant Hollis had smiled in the laundry doorway, Teresa was afraid. But the fear belonged to her now. So did the ruin. Teresa chose the women's changing room because it still had most of a roof. That was the first victory. Not a large one. Not the kind anyone would clap for. But after 7 days of losing doors, keys, work, family, and a room with her name on the rent receipt, a patch of roof that held against the desert sky felt like mercy. She stood in the doorway and studied the room before stepping inside. Marisol had taught her that old places should not be trusted too quickly. Floors could lie. Ceilings could wait until a person stood beneath them. Snakes liked corners, and rotted wood could look solid until weight told the truth. The changing room held 6 narrow stalls, 3 broken benches, and a row of rusted hooks along the wall. One mirror remained above a cracked sink, but the glass had split down the center, dividing Teresa's reflection into two tired women. The floor was coated with dust, sand, mouse droppings, and curled strips of old paint. She set her bags on the safest-looking bench and listened. Wind, a loose shutter tapping, something small moving behind the wall. No voices. That still felt strange. Teresa found a broom in a utility closet near the lobby. Most of the bristles were bent sideways, but it was better than her hands. She tied a rag around her nose and swept the center of the room first. Dust rose in soft brown clouds. It filled the late light coming through the broken windows and made the air look almost golden. By the time she cleared enough floor for her blanket, her back ached and sweat had dried salt white at her collar. She sat on the bench and opened her first bag. Coffee, rice, beans, 2 shirts, 1 sweater, Marisol's photograph. She placed the photograph on the sink ledge, leaning it against the cracked mirror. "You would hate this place," Teresa said. Then she looked around at the broken stalls, the faded blue tiles, the old hooks still waiting for towels. "No," she whispered. "Maybe you wouldn't." In the second bag, she found her dented pot, matches, scraper, notebook, the blue tile, and a small pocket knife with a loose handle. She put the notebook under the folded blanket to keep it away from dust. The tile she kept in her apron pocket. Next, she searched for water. The front sinks were dry. The old drinking fountain gave only a cough of rust. In the men's changing room, one pipe had been cut and capped. The outdoor pool, visible through the rear archway, lay empty under the sinking sun. Teresa went room by room. The steam rooms were dark and smelled of mineral crust. The laundry room had 2 cracked basins and a drain full of sand. The office behind the lobby held a collapsed chair, a calendar from a year long gone, and a drawer full of dead moths. Near the back wall, she found a narrow door marked Pump Room. It was stuck. Teresa leaned her shoulder into it. Nothing moved. She tried again and felt the old wood shift in its frame. On the third push, the door gave with a gasp of dust. Inside, the air was cooler. The pump room was small, crowded with pipes, valves, gauges, and a tank covered in flaking green paint. Most of the gauges were dead. Their needles pointed at nothing. A spider web stretched from one valve wheel to another, like thread left by a careless seamstress. Teresa held her breath and stepped carefully. There, beneath a pipe near the floor, a dark stain marked the concrete. She crouched. A drop of water gathered slowly at the bottom of a joint, trembled, then fell into a shallow, rusted pan someone had left there years before. Plink. Teresa stared at it. Another drop formed. It was not enough to fill a cup quickly. Maybe not even enough to trust. But it was water. She touched the pipe with 2 fingers. Cold, not sun-warmed, not stale from a tank. Cold enough to have come from somewhere deeper than the building. For a moment, she forgot her aching knee. She cleaned the pan, then held her pot beneath the leak. It took a long time to gather even a little. While she waited, she explored the shelves along the pump room wall and found a coil of wire, a cracked rubber hose, 2 old rags stiff with age, and a rusted wrench heavy enough to be useful. By dusk, she had enough water to boil. The old stove in the laundry room looked dead at first. Its iron belly was orange with rust, and one leg had sunk into the floor. But when Teresa opened the door, she found the firebox dry. The chimney pipe was dented, not blocked. In a bin beside it, under a sheet of fallen plaster, lay a handful of brittle kindling. She fed the stove slowly, as if waking a sick animal. Paper first, then splinters, then the driest wood. The first match failed. The second burned her finger. The third caught. A thin flame took hold, blue at the bottom, yellow at the tip. It shivered, bent, almost died, then rose around the splinters. Teresa sat back on her heels. The stove began to tick as metal warmed. She boiled the water, poured rice into the dented pot, and ate from the pot with a spoon she had wrapped in her sweater. The rice was plain. The beans were cold. Dust still clung to the back of her throat. But the food was hers. The fire was hers. The room was broken, but no one was standing at the door telling her to leave. After supper, she carried the pot outside and stood at the edge of the empty pool. The last light of evening lay across the cracked tiles. Shadows filled the deep end. The dry basin looked less like a pool now, and more like a wound someone had tiled over and abandoned. Teresa took the blue tile from her pocket and held it against the pool wall. The color was close. Not exact, but close enough to make her chest tighten. She wondered if the peace she had kept since childhood had come from this very basin. She wondered if Marisol had ever stepped into this water before it vanished from town memory. A sound moved behind her. Teresa turned quickly. An old woman stood beyond the fence, one hand wrapped around the iron bars. She was small, bent at the shoulders, with white hair pinned under a scarf and a cloth shopping bag hanging from one wrist. Her face was lined in a way that made age look less like weakness than weather. "You Teresa Vale?" the woman asked. Teresa slid the tile back into her pocket. "Who's asking?" "Opal Gray." The name touched something distant in Teresa's memory. Laundry. Steam. Women's voices. A younger face near Marisol, maybe, or maybe only a story half heard when adults thought children were not listening. Opal looked past her toward the empty pool. "They all laughed when you bought it," she said. Teresa did not answer. Opal's fingers tightened around the fence. That place didn't dry up by itself. The words settled between them, with the weight of something old and unfinished. Before Teresa could ask what she meant, Opal turned and walked back down the road, her cloth bag swinging against her knee. Teresa stood alone beside the pool until the desert went dark. Later, on the blanket in the changing room, she listened to the stove cooling in the laundry room and the wind slipping through cracked windows. The bathhouse was worse than she had feared. But there was roof enough to sleep under, water enough to boil, fire enough to warm her hands, and one old woman in town who had not looked at her like a thief. For the first time in a week, Teresa closed her eyes without feeling entirely erased. The next morning, Teresa woke before sunrise because the building changed sounds in the dark. At night, the bathhouse groaned and tapped, full of loose shutters, settling boards, and wind moving through broken places. But just before dawn, it grew still enough for smaller sounds to come forward. A faint drip, then another. Teresa opened her eyes. The fire had gone cold in the laundry stove. Pale blue light rested on the cracked mirror. For a moment, she thought the sound came from the pump room leak. Then, she held her breath and listened again. No, this sound was lower, farther away. It came from the courtyard. She rose slowly, pulled on her sweater, and took the scraper and notebook from beneath her blanket. Outside, the desert was gray and quiet. The pool basin sat in the center of the courtyard, like an empty bowl, its cracked blue tiles silvered with dawn. Teresa stepped down into the shallow end. Dust shifted under her shoes. The mineral crust along the floor looked thickest near the center drain, but the sound did not come from there. She walked slowly, tapping the broom handle against the tiles. Solid, solid, solid. Then one tile near the deep end wall answered differently. Hollow. Teresa stopped. She tapped again. The sound was small, but her hands knew it. It was the sound of space beneath a surface that wanted to pretend it was solid. She crouched, brushed sand aside, and studied the tile. It was blue like the others, but its grout line was darker on one side. Someone had set it back with care, not recently, but not the same way the original workers had laid the rest. She wrote the location in her notebook. Deep end, north wall. Third row from bottom. Hollow note under tile. She did not pry it up, not yet. A woman who had been framed with a bracelet did not touch hidden things without making a record first. Instead, Teresa followed the faint trail of mineral whitening along the pool floor. It ran like a dried vein from the hollow tile toward a narrow iron grate half buried in sand. She cleared the grate with her scraper. Beneath it, the channel was dark, but when she lowered her hand, the air rising from it felt cool, cold, almost, the same cold she had felt from the pipe in the pump room. By mid-morning, Teresa had drawn a rough map in her notebook. Pool, hollow tile, drain channel, pump room wall, cold pipe, old leak. The drawing was crooked, but the pattern was clear enough to make her sit back on her heels. The bathhouse was not dry in the way people said it was dry. Something was still moving under it. Near noon, Opal Gray returned. This time she carried a paper sack and a ring of keys tied with red yarn. Teresa saw her through the lobby window and opened the gate before the old woman could knock. "I brought tortillas," Opal said, "and coffee. Bad coffee, but it wakes the dead. Why are you helping me?" Opal looked toward the empty pool. "Because I worked here when that pool had water in it." Teresa went still. Opal stepped inside the courtyard without asking permission, but her face changed when she crossed the threshold. She did not look like a visitor. She looked like someone entering a room where she had once left part of herself. "In the laundry room," Opal said, "there's a cabinet with a broken hinge. Bottom shelf. Did you open it?" "I opened every cabinet I could find." "Not that one." The cabinet was in the back corner behind a fallen drying rack. Its front panel looked plain, swollen from years of heat and dust. Opal chose a small brass key from the yarn ring and fitted it into a lock Teresa had mistaken for a nail hole. The door opened with a wooden sigh. Inside lay a ledger wrapped in yellowed cloth. Not money, not treasure. Just a linen book, its cover softened by hands and time. Teresa opened it carefully. Names filled the pages. Alvarez, Moreno, Salcedo, Chavez, Rees, Campos. Beside each name were numbers, towel counts, locker numbers, dates, and initials stitched into linen sets. Teresa turned a page and found letters she had already seen on old towels in the changing room. A, V, M, S, C. Her fingers stopped at the name Alvarez. "My grandmother was Marisol Alvarez Vale," she said. Opal did not answer right away. "I know." The room seemed to tilt. Teresa looked up. "You knew her?" "I washed beside her before I was old enough to call myself grown. She had the strongest hands in this county, and she knew how to keep quiet when quiet was the only way to keep something safe." "Keep what safe?" Opal closed the ledger gently. "Not today," she said. Teresa felt old anger rise in her chest. "People have been telling me not today my whole life." Opal met her eyes then, and for the first time, Teresa saw fear beneath the old woman's weathered calm. "I am not keeping it from you," Opal said. "I am trying to keep you alive long enough to understand it." Outside, the wind pushed sand against the courtyard wall. Teresa thought of the sheriff looking past her notebook, Grant Hollis smiling in the laundry doorway, Evan's relief when she promised not to stay. Then she thought of the hollow tile. She opened her notebook and turned it toward Opal. "Then start with this," Teresa said. Opal looked at the map, then at the marked spot near the deep end. All the color left her face. For a long moment, the only sound was the slow drip beneath the empty pool. Teresa did not yet know what she had touched, but she understood one thing clearly. The town had not forgotten the Desert Star bathhouse. It had been waiting for her to forget it first. Opal would not let Teresa touch the hollow tile that afternoon. Not because she doubted what was under it, because she feared it. She stood at the edge of the empty pool with the linen ledger pressed against her chest, staring down at the marked tile, as if it were a grave with a name still readable. "You know what this is," Teresa said. Opal's mouth tightened. "I know what it might be." "Then tell me." The old woman looked toward the road beyond the fence. A pickup moved past without slowing. Still, Opal waited until the dust settled before she spoke. "When the bathhouse closed, people said the spring failed. They said the water sank too deep, or the pipes collapsed, or the desert took back what it had given. That was the story printed in the paper. And the truth?" Opal looked down into the pool. The water was still here. Teresa felt the words move through her slowly. Opal touched the linen ledger. "Families owned shares in this place. Not rich families. Laundry women, ranch hands, stonecutters, widows. People who had paid a little at a time because warm water meant something when your body was ruined by work. Alvarez was one of those names. My grandmother. Yes. Why did nobody tell me? Because telling became dangerous." The wind slid over the pool tiles with a dry whisper. Opal sat on the pool steps, breathing as if the past had weight. A new resort group came in 40 years ago. Different company name back then, but the same men behind it. They wanted the spring. They did not want the families. Papers changed. Taxes appeared. Notices were mailed to wrong addresses. English forms were given to people who could not read them well enough to fight. One by one, the names disappeared. Teresa's hand closed around the scraper in her pocket. And the bathhouse? They made it look dead. Opal's eyes lifted to hers. Marisol said if the papers vanished from the courthouse, the water would have to keep the truth. Teresa stared at the hollow tile. The words did not sound like proof. Not yet. But they sounded like the shape of why her mother had pulled her away from the fence. Why Marisol had spoken of spring water like both blessing and wound. Why Grant Hollis had been pleased to see Teresa disgraced. She took out her phone. It was old, with a cracked corner and a battery that drained too fast. Still, the camera worked. She photographed the pool, the marked tile, the ledger, the pump room pipe, the cold stain, and Opal standing beside the deep end. Then she opened her notebook and wrote the date, the time, and both their names. Opal watched her. "You always write things down?" "Since I was young." "Good," Opal said. "Then write that I told you not to break anything unless we could put it back exactly." Teresa almost smiled. Together, they cleared sand from the deep end. Teresa worked slowly with the scraper, loosening mineral crust around the grout. Opal knelt beside her with a small brush from the laundry room. The tile had been set so carefully that an impatient person would have cracked it. Teresa was not impatient. She had spent 18 years cleaning around rich people's carelessness without leaving scratches behind. Bit by bit, the grout line opened. The hollow sound deepened. Under the last crust of white mineral, Teresa saw a thin seam of dark wax. Not mortar. Wax. Someone had sealed the edges. Opal whispered something under her breath. Teresa slid the scraper into the seam and eased upward. The tile resisted. She stopped, changed angle, and tried again. This time, it lifted with a soft sucking sound, as if the pool itself had been holding its breath. Beneath it was not dirt. There was a square of old copper plate, green at the edges, fitted into the basin floor. A small iron ring lay flat against it. Teresa looked at Opal. Opal nodded once. Teresa hooked 2 fingers through the ring and pulled. The plate did not move. She wrapped a rag around the ring and pulled again. Pain shot through her knuckles. The plate shifted a fraction. Opal braced one hand against Teresa's back. Again. This time, the copper cover lifted. Cold air rose from the dark space beneath. Teresa leaned back. Below the plate was a narrow cavity, dry except for beads of moisture along the stone sides. Inside lay a metal tube wrapped in oilcloth and bound with wire blackened by age. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The tube was no longer than Teresa's forearm, but the sight of it made the empty pool feel suddenly crowded with everyone who had tried to protect it. Teresa reached in carefully and lifted it out. The metal was cold, so cold she nearly dropped it. They carried it into the changing room, away from the wind. Teresa wiped the table with an old towel before setting the tube down. Opal locked the front gate, then came back and stood beside her. "Photograph it first," Opal said. Teresa did. Every side, every dent, every loop of wire. Then she cut the wire with the pocket knife. The oilcloth cracked but held. Inside was another layer. Linen this time, yellowed but dry. Teresa unfolded it with both hands. The first paper was a deed. The ink had browned, but the words remained. Desert Star Mineral Baths Cooperative Trust. Teresa read the names slowly. Alvarez, Moreno, Salcedo, Chavez, Ruiz, Campos. More names followed, each written in careful script beside small ownership shares. Not one owner, not one company, a community trust. Her finger stopped on the line near the bottom. Marisol Alvarez Valle. Teresa sat down without meaning to. The room blurred. She had seen her grandmother's name on church papers, on a recipe card, on the back of an old photograph. But never like this. Never as someone who had owned something, never as someone the county should have had to acknowledge. Opal's voice softened. "She signed that after your grandfather died. Paid her share with laundry money." Teresa did not speak. She could not. The second document was a map. It showed the original spring line beneath the basin, the pump room, the old laundry wing, and a second line marked in red pencil. That red line ran away from Desert Star, across county land, toward the ridge where Silver Mesa Springs now stood. Teresa's breath caught. "That can't be right," she said. Opal looked at the map and closed her eyes. "It is." They took the water. They redirected it. The third paper was a letter from a lawyer named Samuel Ortega, dated 39 years earlier. The language was formal, but the warning was clear. County land records had been altered. Tax notices had been issued incorrectly. Several cooperative families had never legally surrendered their shares. If the original deed and spring map could be preserved, the transfer could one day be challenged. At the bottom, in shakier handwriting, someone had added one sentence: "If they erase our names, let the water remember us." Teresa knew the handwriting before Opal said it. Marisol. The final item was a photograph. A group of women stood in front of the full pool. Sleeves rolled, hair pinned, faces serious against the sun. Behind them, water shone bright as glass. Opal was there, young and thin, holding a basket of towels. Beside her stood Marisol, one hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl Teresa did not know. On the back of the photo, names had been written in pencil. Women of Desert Star. Last summer before closure. Teresa held the photograph so carefully, it trembled. For years, she had believed her life began with rented rooms, service doors, and other people's floors. But here was proof that her grandmother had once stood beside water that belonged to her name, not borrowed, not begged for, not cleaned after others had finished using it. Belonged. The discovery was not gold. It was not a box of money. It was heavier than that. It was land, water, names, a map, a legal wound left open under blue tile for nearly 40 years. And now it was in Teresa's hands. Outside, the wind struck the broken window and sent a little sand across the floor. Teresa gathered the papers back into order, not hurriedly, not fearfully, but with the care of a woman folding clean sheets for people who had been gone too long. "What do we do?" Opal asked. Teresa looked at the deed, then at the map, then at the notebook where she had written down every piece of mud, every locked door, every angle of the camera that had turned away from her. She thought of Grant Hollis smiling as the bracelet fell from her coat. She thought of the sheriff refusing to look at her page. She thought of the auction room laughing when her card went up. Then she placed Marisol's photograph beside the deed. "We make copies," Teresa said. Opal let out a breath. "And the originals?" Teresa wrapped them again, tighter than before. "The originals stay where no one with polished shoes can reach them." That evening, while the sun lowered behind the mesa, Teresa returned to the empty pool. She did not replace the tile yet. She only stood in the basin and listened. Far beneath her feet, water moved through stone. Not loudly, not enough for the town to hear, but enough for Teresa. Enough to know the bathhouse was not dead. It had been waiting for someone patient enough to hear it tell the truth. The first copy machine Teresa trusted was not in town. Daniel Reyes told her that before he even agreed to help. He was not the kind of lawyer people pictured when they said the word lawyer. He worked out of 2 rented rooms behind a dental clinic in Albuquerque, with legal aid pamphlets stacked beside a coffee pot and a printer that jammed when the weather changed. He was 32, tired around the eyes, and still young enough to become angry when powerful men lied badly. Opal had known his mother from church. That was enough to get Teresa through his door. Daniel read the deed without speaking. Then he read the letter from Samuel Ortega. Then he unfolded the spring map and laid it beside a modern county map on his desk. Only then did he look up. "Who else has seen these originals?" "Opal," Teresa said. "Me." "Good. Keep it that way." "Are they real?" Daniel took off his glasses. "I think they are dangerous." That was not the same as yes, but Teresa understood. He made copies, scanned everything, and saved them in 3 places. Teresa watched every page pass under the glass. She did not sit down until the originals were wrapped again in oilcloth and tucked inside her canvas bag. "If Grant Hollis knows you have this," Daniel said, "he will not start by suing you. He will start by making you look unstable. He already started. Then he will make it worse." He was right. By the next morning, a white county truck rolled up to the bathhouse gate. 2 inspectors stepped out, followed by Councilman Avery Pike in a straw hat too clean for the road. Avery looked at the building, then at Teresa, as if both were stains on county property. "We received a safety complaint," he said. "From who?" "Anonymous." Teresa almost smiled. "Anonymous wears polished boots?" Avery ignored that. The inspectors walked through the bathhouse with clipboards, writing quickly. They marked the cracked west wall, the broken windows, the damaged roof, the missing rail near the pool steps. Teresa did not argue with the facts. The place was dangerous. She had never claimed otherwise. But when one inspector reached the pool, he looked too long at the deep end. Teresa watched his eyes move toward the tile she had set back in place. "You've been digging in here?" he asked. "Cleaning." "With what permit?" "For sweeping?" Avery stepped closer. "This structure may be condemned. It was sold to me in this condition. Ownership doesn't give you the right to endanger yourself or others. No one cared about danger until I bought it." Avery's jaw tightened. They left a red notice on the gate. "Unsafe structure, review pending." By sunset, half the town knew about it. By dark, someone had spray-painted "thief" on the front door. Teresa stood in the courtyard with a bucket, scrubbing the word by lantern light. The paint smeared red before it faded. Her hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the effort of not letting rage make her careless. Opal arrived with a flashlight. "They want you tired," she said. "I am tired." "Then don't help them by being alone." The next attack came softer. Grant Hollis arrived 2 days later in a black SUV that looked wrong against the rusted fence. He wore a pale shirt, no tie, and the sorrowful expression of a man pretending to regret someone else's misfortune. "I heard about the inspection," he said. Teresa kept sweeping the lobby. Grant placed an envelope on the counter. "I can take this burden off your hands." She did not touch it. "How much?" "Enough for a fresh start. Enough to leave Sandoval County with dignity." Teresa looked at the cracked mirror behind him. In it, Grant's face split down the center. "I had dignity before you put a bracelet in my coat." His eyes cooled. "That is a serious accusation from a woman under suspicion." "Suspicion is not proof." "No," Grant said, "but it is useful." He pushed the envelope closer. "Take the offer. Old buildings burn. Walls fall. People get hurt wandering through ruins they don't understand." Teresa set the broom against the wall. "Is that a warning?" "It is advice. My grandmother used to say, advice that comes with money in an envelope is usually a threat wearing church clothes." For the first time, Grant's smile vanished. "You have no idea what you are standing in." Teresa thought of the deed, the map, Marisol's name, the water moving under stone. "Yes," she said. "I do." Grant left the envelope on the counter. Teresa waited until his SUV disappeared. Then she photographed the envelope, wrote the time in her notebook, and used the broom handle to push it into an empty coffee can. She did not open it. That night, the gate lock was cut. Teresa woke to metal scraping in the courtyard. She did not turn on the lantern. She took the heavy wrench from beside her blanket and moved to the changing room doorway. 2 shadows crossed the pool. One went toward the pump room. The other bent near the deep end. Teresa's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her teeth. She wanted to shout. Instead, she stayed still. The men found nothing. The originals were no longer under the tile. They were wrapped in oilcloth and sealed inside the dead stovepipe above the laundry room, where soot hid the bundle better than any lock could. After a few minutes, one man cursed. "Not here." The other kicked a loose tile across the basin. They left through the gate. Teresa waited until their truck faded down the road. Then she sat on the floor because her legs would not hold her. In the morning, she found the pump room shelf emptied, the cabinet broken, and the deep-end tiles scratched where someone had tried to pry it up with the wrong tool. She photographed everything. Then she walked to the gate and found Opal already there, staring at the cut chain. "They came," Opal said. "Yes." "Did they get it?" "No." Opal closed her eyes. Before noon, Evan came. He stood outside the fence, unable to meet Teresa's eyes. "Grant made an offer," he said. "People say it was generous. People say many things. Aunt Teresa, please, take it, leave. You can start over somewhere else. I am too old to keep starting over every time a man with money wants me gone." Evan gripped the fence. You don't understand what he can do. Teresa looked at her nephew, at the fear he had mistaken for love. I understand exactly what he can do, she said. That is why I'm not selling. After he left, Teresa returned to the pool. The scratched tile sat under the morning sun. For 40 years, people had protected a lie by making the truth look worthless. Now they were trying to do the same thing to her. But Teresa had learned something in all those years of cleaning other people's rooms. A stain only won if everyone agreed not to look at it, and she was done looking away. The first person to come through the gate without laughing was Luis Moreno. He arrived in an old plumbing van with a ladder tied to the roof and a toolbox heavy enough to pull one shoulder lower than the other. Teresa had never spoken to him before, but she knew his face. In a town like Sandoval, working people passed one another for years without needing introductions. They knew shoes, trucks, lunch pails, and the tired way a person stood at the end of a shift. Opal opened the gate for him. My father's name was in that linen book, Luis said. Teresa was standing near the pump room door with her notebook under one arm. She looked at him carefully. Moreno? Luis nodded. Rafael Moreno. He told us the spring was stolen. My mother told him to stop saying it before someone took his job. He stepped into the courtyard and looked at the empty pool. Something changed in his face. Not surprise. Recognition. I was 6 when I last saw water in there, he said. Then he knelt beside the scratched tile, ran 2 fingers along the grout, and frowned. Whoever came here didn't know tile, they knew force. That sounds like Grant Hollis, Opal said. Luis did not smile. He spent the afternoon studying the pump room. He traced pipes through walls, tapped old valves, and found a capped line behind a panel Teresa had thought was solid plaster. He did not break it open. He only marked it with chalk and told Teresa to photograph everything before anyone touched it. By evening, Daniel Reyes arrived from Albuquerque with a portable scanner, a stack of folders, and a warning. The article goes live tomorrow, he said. What article? Teresa asked. The reporter I called wants names, documents, and 1 photograph of you at the bathhouse. Teresa shook her head. This is not about my face. No, Daniel said. But people believe stories faster when they can see who paid the price. She did not like that. Being seen had never protected her. It had made her easier to judge. But Opal placed one hand over the linen ledger and said, Let them see you standing where they tried to erase us. So Teresa agreed. The photograph was simple. No smile, no pose. She stood in the empty pool, with the cracked blue tile behind her, holding Marisol's photograph in one hand and her brown notebook in the other. By sunrise, the story had reached farther than the county. Not everyone believed it. Some called her bitter. Some said old deeds meant nothing. Some said a woman accused of theft would say anything for money. But others came. A school teacher named Elena Chavez brought baptism records showing her grandmother's address listed as Desert Star Cooperative Housing. A mechanic named Tom Ruiz brought a cigar box full of old receipts, each one marked spring dues. A nurse from the clinic, Sarah Campos, brought a photograph of 3 women in wet aprons standing beside the bathhouse laundry, one of them with the same initials found on the linen towels. They came quietly at first, as if entering a church after a funeral. No one brought wealth. No one brought power. They brought folded papers, family stories, damaged photographs, and names that had survived in kitchen drawers longer than they had survived in county files. Teresa spread everything across the lobby counter. She gave each person a number in her notebook. She wrote down who brought what, where it came from, who had kept it, and what name it connected to. Daniel scanned every page. Luis photographed the pipes. Opal sat beside the linen ledger and identified initials with a memory sharper than anyone expected. A.V. was Alvarez Vale, she said. R.M. was Rafael Moreno. S.C. was Salcedo, not Campos. Campos' towels were green stripe, not blue. Teresa listened and wrote. The more names returned, the less the bathhouse felt empty. Still, she made the rules clear. No originals leave with anyone but their owners, she said. No one signs anything from the county without Daniel reading it. No one talks to Grant Hollis alone. And no one sells their name back for an envelope. No one argued. That surprised her. For most of her life, Teresa had been treated as a woman who cleaned after decisions were made. Now people waited while she decided where the evidence should go, which pages to copy first, which doors to lock, and where the originals would sleep each night. She did not mistake that for power. She understood it as responsibility. That evening, after the last visitor left, Opal found Teresa sitting on the pool steps, rubbing dust from the little blue tile she had carried since childhood. "You look scared," Opal said. "I am." "Good. Means you know it matters." Teresa looked across the courtyard. For the first time, she could imagine water there. Not the private blue pools of Silver Mesa Springs, guarded by prices and gates, but warm mineral water open to old hands, sore backs, tired feet, and people whose names had been made small for too long. "They took a spring," Teresa said. Opal lowered herself beside her. "They took more than that." Teresa nodded. "They took the right to remember." The wind moved through the broken building, but it no longer sounded empty. It carried paper rustle, tool clink, old names spoken aloud, and the soft breathing of a place beginning to fill again. Teresa closed the notebook. Tomorrow would bring anger. Maybe lawyers. Maybe inspectors. Maybe Grant Hollis standing in another polished room, calling her a liar. But tonight, the bathhouse had witnesses. And for the first time since the bracelet fell from her coat pocket, Teresa Vale was not standing alone. The town meeting was moved from the council room to the old high school auditorium because too many people came. That was what the notice said. Teresa knew the real reason. The council room was small enough to control. The auditorium was not. It had wide doors, old wooden seats, a stage with faded curtains, and enough space for working people to sit where they could be seen. She arrived early with Opal, Luis, Daniel, and 2 cardboard boxes of copied records. The originals were not with them. Teresa had hidden those where only she and Opal knew, wrapped tight and protected from hands that had already proved what they were willing to do. Grant Hollis stood near the stage with his attorney, a thin man in a navy suit who smiled without warmth. Councilman Avery Pike sat behind a folding table with Councilwoman Darden and Sheriff Larkin. The sheriff did not look at Teresa when she passed. That told her enough. By 6 o'clock, the room was full. Families from old neighborhoods sat together with folders on their laps. Resort employees stood along the back wall, uncertain whether they had come to listen or report. A reporter from Albuquerque set a recorder on the front table. Evan sat near the aisle with his hands locked together. Teresa took the seat Daniel pointed to, but she did not sit long. Her knee hurt. Her palms were damp. The room smelled of dust, floor wax, and nervous people. Avery Pike called the meeting to order. "This is not a court proceeding," he said. "This is a public clarification regarding misinformation about county land records and private water infrastructure." Misinformation. Teresa wrote the word in her notebook. Grant's attorney spoke first. He said the Desert Star Bathhouse was an abandoned tax property purchased for $12 by a woman with no training in land law, water engineering, or archival handling. He said old papers were often misunderstood. He said emotional family stories could not rewrite legal ownership. Then he turned slightly toward Teresa. "And we must remember," he added, "that Mrs. Vale recently left employment at Silver Mesa Springs under a cloud of serious suspicion." A murmur moved through the auditorium. Teresa felt the old heat of shame rise in her neck. For a second, she saw the laundry room again, the velvet pouch, the younger women looking at the floor, Grant in the doorway. Daniel leaned close. "You don't have to answer that part yet." Teresa nodded. She stood anyway. The room quieted. "I was accused," she said. "I was not charged. I was not tried. And tonight is not about a bracelet." Grant's attorney lifted his brows. "It speaks to credibility." "No," Teresa said. "It speaks to method." That stopped him for half a breath. Teresa opened her brown notebook on the table. "I cleaned at Silver Mesa Springs for 18 years. I wrote down leaks, broken locks, lost jewelry, and maintenance requests, because poor women get blamed when rich places do not keep records. On August 21st, I found gray mineral mud outside a locked service door behind the new VIP spa wing." Daniel placed a copy of the notebook page beneath the document camera. Her handwriting appeared on the screen behind the stage, large and uneven. A few people turned to look at Grant. Teresa continued. August 22nd, same mud. August 24th. Grant Hollis entered that locked door with Councilman Pike and Councilwoman Darden after hours. The next morning, a diamond bracelet was found in my coat pocket. Grant's attorney stood. This is speculation. Daniel stood too. These are contemporaneous notes. We are not asking the room to convict anyone tonight. We are asking why these facts were ignored. The reporter's pen moved quickly. Luis came next. He laid out the pipe photographs. The old spring map was projected beside a modern utility diagram. The red line on the old map crossed county land and ended at the ridge where Silver Mesa now pumped its private spa pools. That capped line is still in the Desert Star pump room, Luis said. The mineral residue matches the same flow path. I worked plumbing in this county for 37 years. Pipes may get buried. They do not forget where they were aimed. A few people laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because truth had finally sounded plain. Then Opal walked to the front with the linen ledger. She moved slowly. Teresa wanted to help her, but Opal shook her head once. This part belonged to her. I washed towels at Desert Star when I was 17, Opal said. These initials are not decoration. They are family sets. Alvarez Vile, Moreno, Salcedo, Chavez, Ruiz, Campos. We kept records because each family had shares. Not big shares, not fancy shares, but enough to belong. Councilwoman Darden looked pale. Avery Pike said, "A laundry book is not a deed." "No," Opal said, "it is a witness." Daniel then placed the copied deed under the camera. The auditorium changed. People leaned forward. Names appeared on the screen in brown ink. Alvarez, Moreno, Salcedo, Chavez, Ruiz, Campos. Then the line Teresa had stared at until it entered her bones. Marisol Alvarez Vale. Teresa heard someone behind her whisper, "That's her grandmother." Grant's attorney adjusted his cuffs. An old cooperative document does not prove present ownership. The county records show later transfer. Daniel placed the lawyer's letter beside it. This letter from Samuel Ortega warned that those later transfers were defective. It references tax notices mailed to wrong addresses, untranslated forms, and altered record books after the courthouse storage fire. Avery slammed his palm lightly on the table. Careful. Teresa looked at him. That word has followed every poor family in this county for 40 years. The auditorium fell still. She picked up the small blue tile from the table and held it in her palm. "I carried this since I was 8. I found it outside the bathhouse fence after my mother pulled me away and told me some doors close before children know who shut them. I did not understand then. I understand now." Grant stood at last. "This is theater," he said. "A bitter former cleaner, a few old people with memories, and a pile of papers nobody can verify." Teresa turned toward him. "You can question my education," she said. "You cannot change the facts." Daniel clicked the next file. On the screen appeared a still image from the resort office security system. The reporter had obtained it from a former manager who had decided, too late but not never, to tell the truth. It showed the missing diamond bracelet in a safe drawer inside Grant's administrative office 2 hours after Teresa had supposedly stolen it. The room erupted. Grant's face hardened. His attorney reached for his phone. Sheriff Larkin stood halfway, then seemed to remember the reporter's recorder. Daniel raised his voice. "We also have a signed statement from the former floor manager, saying he was instructed to place the bracelet in Mrs. Vale's coat after she was seen near the service corridor." Teresa did not look at Grant then. She looked at the sheriff. "You asked if I had proof," she said. He had no answer. Avery Pike tried to end the meeting. People refused to leave. Names were being spoken aloud now. Moreno, Chavez, Salcedo, Campos, Ruiz, Alvarez Vale. Each name rose from a different row like stones lifted from a buried path. Grant pushed away from the table and walked toward the side exit. For a moment, Teresa thought he would escape the room the way men like him always escaped, through doors opened by people too afraid to stop them. But Evan stepped into the aisle. He did not touch Grant. He only stood there, trembling. "You should stay," Evans said. It was not brave in the way movies made bravery look. His voice shook. His face was pale. But he did not move. Grant stopped. The reporter turned her camera toward him. That was enough. By the time the meeting finally broke, the council had agreed under public pressure to preserve the Bathhouse records, suspend any condemnation order, and request an independent review of the spring line. Daniel warned Teresa that this was only the beginning. She knew. Court would come. Lawyers would come. Denials would come, dressed in better language. But as she stepped outside into the cool desert night, people did not move away from her. Mrs. Calder from the grocery store stood near the steps, twisting her purse strap. "I'm sorry," she said. Teresa could have said many things. Instead, she nodded once. The apology did not repair everything. Nothing that small could. But it marked the first crack in the wall they had built around her name. Opal touched her arm. "You did it." Teresa looked back through the auditorium doors, where Grant Hollis stood, surrounded by questions he could not sweep away. "No," she said. "We opened the door." Then she placed the blue tile back into her pocket and walked down the steps with the old names following her into the night. The court order arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded inside a plain envelope, with no decoration and no apology. Teresa was in the Bathhouse courtyard when Daniel brought it through the gate. She had been sweeping sand from the pool steps. Not because the place was clean yet, but because her hands needed work while her heart waited. Daniel did not smile when he saw her. That frightened her more than if he had. "Read it to me," she said. He opened the paper carefully. The district court had issued a temporary injunction against Silver Mesa Springs. All pumping connected to the disputed spring line was to stop until the land and water claims were reviewed. The county was ordered to preserve every remaining record connected to Desert Star Bathhouse, the cooperative trust, and the transfers that had followed the courthouse fire. Grant Hollis was named. Councilman Avery Pike was named. So was the former resort manager who had placed the bracelet in Teresa's coat. Daniel's voice stayed calm. But Opal began to cry before he reached the final paragraph. The court recognized sufficient evidence to reopen the Desert Star cooperative claim. For a long moment, Teresa did not move. The broom rested in her hand. Dust clung to her skirt. A line of sunlight cut across the empty pool and touched the cracked blue tiles. "Does that mean we won?" Luis asked, from the pump room doorway. Daniel folded the paper. "It means they cannot bury it again." That was enough for Teresa. News moved through Sandoval County faster than wind. By afternoon, the sheriff's office confirmed an investigation into evidence tampering. By evening, the resort announced that Grant Hollis was taking temporary leave. The next morning, Avery Pike resigned from the council, saying he wanted to spare the town distraction. No one believed him. The diamond bracelet was returned to the guest from the VIP wing, but this time the story around it had changed. It was no longer the thing Teresa had stolen. It was the thing used to steal Teresa's name. The apology from Silver Mesa Springs came on letterhead. Teresa read it once, then placed it in her notebook without folding it. "It sounds like a machine wrote it," Opal said. "It did," Teresa answered. But the court record did not sound like a machine. It sounded like names restored to paper. Marisol Alvarez Valle, Rafael Moreno, Salcedo, Chavez, Ruiz, Campos. One by one, descendants of the old cooperative signed affidavits. Some wanted compensation. Some wanted the truth recorded. Some wanted nothing but their grandparents' names spelled correctly for once. When Daniel asked Teresa what she wanted, the room grew quiet. They were gathered in the bathhouse lobby around the sagging counter. Copies of maps lay under stones to keep the wind from lifting them. Luis had chalk on his sleeves. Opal sat with the linen ledger across her lap. Evan stood near the doorway, fixing a hinge he had broken twice before getting it right. Teresa looked toward the empty pool. For weeks, people had asked if she would sell her share. Silver Mesa's board had sent a second offer after Grant was removed, larger than the first, cleaner in language, wrapped in promises of restoration and community access. Everyone knew what it meant. "Let us own the story again." Teresa placed both hands on the counter. "I do not want a private settlement," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then what do you want?" I want the bathhouse placed in a community trust. I want the families named. I want the spring line reviewed by an engineer not paid by the resort. And if the water comes back, I want working people to be able to use it without asking permission from men who stole it. No one spoke for a moment. Then Louise said, "My father would have liked that." Opal wiped her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. Marisol, too. Teresa looked down at her hands. They were still rough, still marked by years of bleach and heat. Victory had not made them softer. She was glad of that. A month later, the first official correction was entered into the county archive. It did not repair 40 years. It did not return the dead, or unbend backs, or erase the shame laid on families who had been told they lost what had been taken. But it put the names back, and when Teresa stood in the courthouse to sign her statement, Sheriff Larkin waited near the wall. "I should have looked at your notebook," he said. "Yes," Teresa said. There was no anger in her voice. That surprised both of them. He lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Teresa closed the notebook against her chest. "Next time a woman brings you facts," she said, "look at the page before you look at her shoes." He nodded. Outside, the desert air was clean after rain. Teresa walked down the courthouse steps slowly, not because she was weak, but because she no longer needed to hurry away from rooms that had once made her feel small. At the bottom, Opal waited beside Luis and Daniel. No one cheered. No one needed to. Teresa had not become rich. She had not become famous. The bathhouse still had broken windows, cracked tile, and a roof that leaked when the wind came from the west. But the lie had lost its roof. And the truth, after 40 years under stone, had finally been given air. The Desert Star bathhouse did not reopen quickly. Teresa was grateful for that. Fast things had hurt her before. Fast accusations, fast rumors, fast doors closing before she could speak. The bathhouse deserved a slower kind of return, the kind made by hands that knew what it meant to repair instead of replace. The first month was only clearing. Luis removed broken pipe sections and labeled each one before setting it aside. Daniel filed papers until his eyes reddened. Opal sat near the laundry room window with the linen ledger open across her knees, naming families whenever memory rose clear enough to trust. Teresa swept. She swept the lobby, the changing rooms, the courtyard, and the pool steps. She swept sand from corners where it had gathered for decades. She swept around cracked tiles instead of over them. Some days, people from the old families came to help. Some brought tools. Some brought coffee. Some brought nothing but 2 hours and a quiet willingness to stand inside a place their grandparents had been told to forget. No one turned Desert Star into a luxury resort. That was the first rule Teresa wrote on a sheet of paper and taped behind the front counter. No private tubs, no velvet ropes, no guest tears, no polished words about heritage written by people who had stolen it. The bathhouse would be simple. Clean benches, safe steps, warm towels, a repaired roof, a small mineral pool for sore hands, tired backs, and feet that had stood too long on hard floors. When the engineer finished inspecting the spring line, he found what Luis had already suspected. The original water had not died. It had been diverted, forced through newer pipes toward Silver Mesa's private spa system. Restoring it would take work, permits, and patience. Teresa had learned all three. By winter, the first thin stream returned to Desert Star. It did not rush in dramatically. It entered through a cleaned pipe near the deep end, no wider than a man's thumb at first, trembling as if unsure it was allowed back. Teresa stood alone in the pool basin when she saw it. A line of water slid across the tile and touched the toe of her shoe. For a moment, she could not breathe. Then she stepped back and let it move. By spring, the pool was not full, but it held water enough to reflect the sky. The first public day came in April. No banners hung outside. No brass band played. The old sign had been repaired, but not repainted too perfectly. Desert Star mineral baths still looked weathered, because Teresa wanted people to see that survival had texture. Inside the lobby, a new wooden board had been mounted to the wall. At the top, Daniel had carved the words, "The water was never lost, only hidden." Below that were the names: Marisol Alvarez Valle, Rafael Moreno, Elena Salcedo, Beatriz Chavez, Tomas Reis, Lucia Campos, and dozens more, each restored from deeds, ledgers, letters, receipts, church records, and memory. Opal stood before the board for a long time. Then she reached out and touched Marisol's name with 2 fingers. "She would have scolded you for making such a fuss," Opal said. Teresa smiled. "Then she would have checked whether we folded the towels right." "She absolutely would have." They laughed softly, not because the past was light, but because some grief finally had somewhere to sit down. Evan came that morning with his wife and children. He had spent weeks repairing doors, sanding benches, and fixing the laundry room hinge that refused to close straight. He stood near the counter, turning his cap in his hands. "I should have opened the door," he said. Teresa looked at him for a while. "Yes," she said. His face tightened. Then she added, "But you came back with tools." It was not forgiveness in the easy way people like to imagine. It was a beginning. For Teresa, beginnings mattered more when they did not pretend nothing had happened. The first people to use the pool were not donors, officials, or reporters. They were workers. A retired waitress with swollen ankles. A mechanic whose hands had begun to stiffen. A school custodian with a bad hip. Opal, who lowered her feet into the warm water and closed her eyes like a woman hearing a song from another room. Teresa did not get in at first. She stood near the pool with a stack of towels in her arms, watching steam rise gently in the morning air. She had spent most of her life standing at the edge of other people's comfort, making sure they had what they needed and leaving before anyone asked what she needed. Opal opened one eye. "Don't you dare make us enjoy this without you." Teresa shook her head, but she set the towels down. Slowly, she removed her shoes. Her feet were narrow, tired, and marked by years of work. She stepped down into the pool. The water closed around her ankles. Warm, mineral-rich, real. She lowered herself onto the step and placed one hand on the blue tile beside her. It was the small, broken piece she had kept since childhood, now set carefully into the pool's edge, not hidden anymore, not loose in a tin box under a rented bed. For years, Teresa had thought she carried that tile because she could not let go of an old mystery. Now she understood. She had been carrying proof that some broken things were only waiting to be returned to the place they belonged. Near the wall, Marisol's name caught the light. Teresa looked at it until the letters blurred. The town had called her disposable. It had called the bathhouse worthless. It had called stolen water a business model, and a framed woman a thief. But the water had remembered. The tile had remembered. And Teresa Vale had stayed long enough to listen. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that a broken beginning does not mean a broken life. That evening, after everyone left, Teresa sat alone beside the restored pool as sunset turned the adobe walls gold. The desert wind moved softly through the courtyard. For the first time in her life, it did not sound like laughter. It sounded like home.